How exactly was the most protected man in the Middle East finally eliminated? On May 28, 2026, the world woke up to a headline that seemed fundamentally impossible. Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, was gone. And it didn't take a months-long ground war or a full-scale invasion. It took exactly 30 seconds. Within half a minute of the opening strike, a power structure built over 4 decades was decapitated right in the heart of Tehran. To understand the gravity of this, you have to realize the sheer scale of the target. This wasn't just a political figure. This was a man whose influence and security detail loomed larger than even bin Laden's at his absolute peak. For years, he was a total ghost, a phantom commanding an empire while staying entirely off the radar of direct strikes. He was the ultimate high-value prize. So how did it all finally end for the 86-year-old leader? It happened in a fortified West Wing corridor. Even when he was surrounded by elite guards and a city blanketed in layers of military-grade sensors, he was still exposed. You might think it was a deep cover mole or a high-level betrayal that brought him down. But the real match that lit the powder keg was something much more human. The fatal flaw? He actually believed he was untouchable. He trusted the absolute protection of his headquarters so much that it became a tactical death trap. But how did US and Israeli intelligence punch through the world's most dense air defense network? To understand his explosive end, we have to look at the fortress he built. Tehran wasn't just a capital city, it was a fortress. To understand the sheer impossibility of what happened on that Tuesday morning, you have to look at the shield the supreme leader had built around himself. This wasn't some remote compound in the mountains. It was the heart of a nation protected by layers of defense that military analysts called the Iranian S-300 on steroids. At the center of this web sat the Pure Street Complex, a sprawling, high-security nerve center where every square inch was monitored by elite units of the Revolutionary Guard. This area was considered a dead zone for any hostile aircraft. On the rooftops and hidden in the surrounding hills were the Bavar 373 surface-to-air missile systems, the pride of Iranian domestic engineering. These weren't just missiles, they were the eyes of the regime, capable of tracking up to 60 targets at once and engaging them with lethal precision. Combined with the Sayyad 4 interceptors and an ultra-modern radar network, the airspace over Tehran was essentially a solid wall of iron. The generals inside the complex didn't just feel safe, they felt untouchable. They believed that any strike, any approach would be detected hundreds of miles before it ever reached the city limits. It was this absolute certainty, this unshakable faith in their own invincibility that created the perfect environment for a tactical nightmare. But while Tehran slept in its fake sense of security, two nations were preparing to unleash the most coordinated airstrike in modern history. This wasn't a small-scale surgical operation. This was a massive high-stakes gamble involving over 200 combat aircraft. The scale was staggering. Imagine 200 jets, including F-35 stealth fighters, heavy-hitting F-15 Strike Eagles, and a massive fleet of aerial tankers, all taking off in near-perfect synchronicity. They called it Operation Lion's Roar on the Israeli side, while the Americans labeled their half of the mission Operation Epic Fire. Two names, one singular goal: the complete decapitation of the Iranian leadership. The journey alone was a suicide mission. We are talking about a 2,000-kilometer flight, over 1,200 miles through some of the most contested and sensitive airspace on the planet. To pull this off, the strike force had to bypass the borders of multiple nations, threading the needle through Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, all while maintaining absolute radio silence. One single blip on a secondary radar, one leaked communication, and the entire mission would have ended in a diplomatic and military catastrophe. The logistics were a nightmare. Because of the extreme distance, the jets couldn't just fly straight to the target. They had to perform mid-air refueling in total darkness, thousands of feet above hostile territory with their transponders turned off. It was a high-wire act where the slightest mistake meant a jet falling out of the sky, or a collision that would alert the entire Middle East. As the sun began to peak over the horizon on May 28th, the contrast was chilling. Down on Pure Street, the morning was quiet. High-ranking officials were arriving for what they thought was a routine, high-level strategy meeting. There was no panic, no sirens, and no signs of distress. The city was waking up, traffic was starting to crawl through the streets, and the leadership was settling into their fortified West Wing corridor. They felt protected by the concrete, by the guards, and by the multi-billion-dollar radar net they believed was scanning every inch of the sky. But 30,000 feet above them, the air was screaming. Operation Epic Fire was moving into its final phase. The massive formation of jets wasn't just coming, it was descending like a wall of steel. The silence of the night was about to be shattered by the roar of the most advanced engines ever built. The fortress was about to meet the confint no du doute, the violent fury of a plan months in the making. The American and Israeli pilots were locking their targets, their fingers hovering over the release triggers, while the Iranian defenders below were still looking at blank radar screens. The trap wasn't just set, it was already closing. The ghost that had commanded an empire for decades was sitting in a room that was about to become his tomb. But how? How did 200 aircraft fly across 3 borders and into the most heavily defended airspace in the world without a single missile being fired? How did they turn the Bavar 373, a system designed to kill anything that flies, into a useless collection of metal and wires. To understand the moment the first bomb hit, we have to look at the invisible war that was happening in the background, the digital magic that turned a fortress into a paper house. How exactly did they blind the eyes of a nation? So, how exactly did they pull off the ultimate vanishing act? How do you fly 200 massive pieces of machinery into the most monitored airspace on the planet and remain a total phantom? The answer isn't just stealth. It's a masterclass in digital deception and a fatal reliance on convenience. It started months before the first jet ever left the tarmac. The CIA and Mossad weren't just watching, they were listening. Think of signal intelligence, or SIGINT, as a massive digital vacuum cleaner. They weren't looking for a single phone call. They were harvesting trillions of encrypted data fragments. Every time a high-ranking aide to the supreme leader moved, every time a secure courier pinged a tower, and every time a specific energy signature was detected at the Pure Street complex, it added a pixel to the image for the longest time. The guy was a ghost, staying entirely off the radar by using archaic communication methods. But even a ghost leaves a trail. By May 27th, the trail went hot. They didn't just find him, they found his schedule. They knew about the meeting before the Iranian generals even finished their morning prayers. But knowing where he is doesn't matter if you can't get to him. This is where the technology gets terrifying. You see, the Iranian Bavar 373 is no joke. It's a sophisticated beast designed to detect anything that moves. But the Americans and Israelis didn't just bring better planes. They brought a ghost army. This is the secret weapon that turned the tide. The MELD, or miniature air-launched decoy. Think of these as high-tech mimics. They are small drone-like devices launched from motherships miles away. But to a radar screen, they are indistinguishable from a full-sized F-15 or an F-16. The trick is to overwhelm the brain of the defense system. As the strike force approached, they launched hundreds of these MELDs on the Iranian radar screens at the Tehran command center. They didn't see a few stealth jets. They saw a massive, terrifying wall of hundreds of incoming fighters charging directly at the city. It was a digital stampede. The radar operators did exactly what the mission planners expected. They panicked. They locked their sensors onto the brightest, loudest targets, the decoys, and started firing their multi-million-dollar missiles at ghosts. By the time they realized they were chasing phantoms, their radar batteries were exposed and their magazines were empty. They were blinded by their own defenses. While the eyes of the regime were distracted by the digital noise, the real predators were already inside the perimeter. This is the incredible power of radar cross-section, or RCS. To a normal radar, a Boeing 747 looks like a mountain, an F-15 looks like a large truck. But a B-2 Spirit or an F-35, they are designed to be almost non-existent. We are talking about a massive strategic bomber that has the radar signature of a large bird. The F-35, it has an RCS roughly the size of a metal marble. Imagine trying to find a single marble in the middle of a hurricane of decoys and electronic noise. It's impossible. The stealth jets didn't just fly. They glided through the gaps in the coverage like a knife through silk. They utilized the harsh mountainous terrain around Tehran as a natural shield, staying low in the radar shadows until the very last second. But here's the part that really highlights the fatal flaw. Why was Ali Khamenei in that specific West Wing corridor of a 6-story building instead of buried 300 feet under a mountain in a nuclear-hardened bunker? The answer is as old as time. Convenience. Unlimited power often buys unlimited arrogance. Tactical reports suggest the 86-year-old leader didn't want to spend his days in a dark, damp tunnel. He wanted the sun. He wanted the comfort of his office, the proximity to his advisors, and the ease of access to the tunnels under Pure Street. He believed that the Bavar 373 and the layers of elite guards were an impenetrable wall. He thought that being in the center of a bustling city of 9 million people made him a ghost by default. He stayed at the surface because he truly believed the Americans would never have the audacity or the capability to reach into the heart of Tehran and touch him. He was wrong. While he was preparing to address his generals, thinking he was shielded by $1 billion worth of concrete and sensors, the coordinates were already locked. The ghost wasn't hidden. He was framed in a digital crosshair. The strategy of staying under the radar had worked for 40 years, but on this morning, the radar wasn't just failing, it was being used against him. But taking down a leader is only the beginning of the chaos. The moment the electronic veil was lifted, the reality of the situation became terrifyingly clear. The defenders finally saw what was actually coming, but it was far too late to organize our response. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the high-pitched whine of jet engines that shouldn't have been there. The trap was sprung, and the most wanted man in the world had nowhere left to run. So, what exactly happened in those final, violent 30 seconds? To understand the end of the empire, we have to look at the exact moment the heavy suppressing fire met the reinforced doors of the West Wing. The silence of the morning was about to be replaced by the roar of 50 caliber fire and the shattering blast of the most precise weapon in the world. It's 8:15 a.m. The electronic noise has done its job. The Iranian radar operators are still chasing ghosts on their screens, but the real predators are already directly overhead. High above the Pure Street complex, in the cockpit of a specialized F-15 Strike Eagle, the pilot locks onto the final coordinates of the West Wing. With a single command, he releases the GBU-28. This isn't just a bomb, it's a 5,000-pound laser-guided spear, a bunker buster designed for the sole purpose of reaching the unreachable. As the weapon drops, it doesn't just explode on impact. That would be too simple. This is high-granularity warfare. The bomb utilizes a hardened penetrator casing that allows it to slice through the roof and multiple floors of reinforced concrete like they were made of paper. It's looking for the heart of the structure. Deep inside the West Wing corridor, the 86-year-old Supreme Leader is just beginning to move toward the underground meeting room. He doesn't hear the jet engines, he doesn't hear a siren. All he feels is a sudden, terrifying shift in the air pressure. The GBU-28 detonates exactly where the SIGINT placed the target. The explosion isn't a fiery blast on the surface. It's a subterranean shockwave that vaporizes the structural supports of the corridor. Within 30 seconds, the entire West Wing collapses. Tons of steel and concrete, the very shield he spent decades building, instantly become his tomb. The man who commanded a paramilitary empire that brought the region to its knees is buried before he can even utter a final prayer. The ghost of Tehran is finally silenced. The aftermath was a whirlwind of shock and fire. By the end of that day, President Donald Trump took to social media to announce that the Supreme Leader had been killed. It took only a few more hours for Iranian state TV to officially confirm the news, announcing the death of the leader along with his closest military advisors. They declared 40 Nay Kwok-Tang, 40 days of national mourning, but the message to the world was already sent. A power structure that had survived for over 3 decades was decapitated in a single surgical strike. The fortress had fallen, and the lesson here is as cold as the concrete of the West Wing. In the modern age of stealth, MELD decoys, and high-velocity penetrators, there is no such thing as absolute protection, not even in the center of your own capital. The richest drug lords and the most powerful leaders all share the same fatal flaw. They believe their own legend of invincibility right up until the moment it falls on top of them. This operation didn't just kill a man, it shattered the command structure of an entire nation and left a gaping hole in the global balance of power. The world changed in those 30 seconds. The question now isn't just who will take his place, but where the next ghost is hiding, and if they've realized that the walls around them are much thinner than they think. We also made a deep dive into the sea, air, and land components of the global nuclear triad. So subscribe to make sure you don't miss our next analysis of the weapons that are rewriting history.